Pues bienvenidos a un episodio más de Reventándonos Podcast, un podcast donde invitamos a personas que se están enfrentando a un cambio organizacional o bien nos están dando herramientas para reinventarnos hoy para el futuro. Pues hoy tenemos una conexión especial desde Australia, desde New South Wales, con Steve Tighe. Pues Steve Tighe es estuvo en Foster's, en la cervecería Foster's como Chief Foresight Officer, ya nos contará un poquito. Y es uno de nuestros grandes referentes en Foresight. Estamos hablando un poquito de Foresight y de cambio organizacional. Ya lo verán y seguramente disfrutaremos mucho este episodio. So, welcome to the show, Steve. Nice to see you, to have you here with us.
Yeah, well, pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Steve. So we want to start with a checking round. So everybody know you a little bit more and know ourselves too. So the checking round is, yeah, you you like soccer and it's lovely. Some people from Australia love soccer. So what's your relationship with soccer? What do you like about soccer?
Well, it's a very recent relationship. I never played soccer in my life, but
Mhm.
I live in a regional town in New South Wales, and I think when you have a child and the child gets involved in sport, uh, there's not exactly an abundance of coaches and so forth around. So it's interesting where life takes you. So I think she got involved with soccer, and so I put my hand up to coach the team. And here we are, 7 years later, and I'm still trying to get them to control the ball before they kick it, which it's a work in progress. But at least I've stopped them from doing handstands, so that took about 5 years.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, so that's great. But I enjoy what I do enjoy about it, the coaching aspect. It's great to see kids develop, and I like the kind of the tactical side of the game in terms of you may not necessarily have the best team, but how do you move the kids around and to try and get the best out of the team? So I enjoy that challenge, and I think I was mentioning to you off air that we're approaching finals in the next month or so, and that's always yeah, then that's what you strive to make as a team. So hopefully we'll get some good results over the next few weeks.
Wow, sounds lovely that you love the game, and love what you say that you enjoy to uh, teach people on the tactical thing,
Yeah.
and there's many very famous trainers like Mourinho or that he used to play football, even if those I think his dad was a goalkeeper and everything like that, but you have like those examples even in American football that you see that don't necessarily play, but they
Yep.
are great coaches. That's a good thing. Steve, I'm glad that you like soccer. And well, in my I love soccer too, and in Monterrey is a very famous city in Mexico from soccer. But I used to grow up I studied in Spain and fell in love with the Athletic de Bilbao. So that is a pretty unique team that plays with people of the region, and so they have many school of football. So it's basically my team. Athletic Bilbao is one.
Mhm.
Uh, I love that team and the love of soccer, and Bilbao is a pretty good city that breed you breed always soccer every place you go in Bilbao. So it's a good thing. Well, thank you for opening yourself for soccer, and we have I know that we have a good audience that loves football soccer, so they're gonna
Yep.
love this. Uh, well, here at my side, I have your book that is amazing, that Rethinking Strategy. So I think it's 6 years from now that go
Yep.
out. I think I faced to him, I encountered about it him like the 2020, by the late like October 2020, by the end of that year.
Yep.
And I really appreciate, thankful you write this book and I recommend a lot. We're gonna put, of course, the link to the to this book, but I love it because you started with some of the questions that many people actually in organizations does, that how do you get ahead of trends? It's like something that is always on the top of mind of many people. And this actually was before you met Strategic Foresight. I don't know if you can uh, take us to that time when you heard that question at the organization that you work, and that changed in your mind. How did you change, or how was your, like, this aha moment for you?
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, I'll give you a bit of background. I came out of university and worked at Foster's, the brewing company known around the world. Um, I'd been there 7, 8 years, call it 8 years, and I had always been in analytical positions, very much around market analysis, so analyzing trends and so forth. And I did a lot of uh, work in that area and got elevated through the company based on those skills as an analyst. So we're talking about products gaining market share, losing market share. Um, so very much kind of involved in that type of area, if you like. And Foster's was a very competitive company in a very competitive environment,
Mhm.
fighting for market share of the beer category or alcohol category. And I was a very competitive person, so I was very much driven by how do I improve my insights into the market? And that really drove me for a couple of years. And I worked closely in about 2003 with the marketing team, and I could see how attached they were to trends. It was almost like, the moves that they were making were all based on trends, and that's fine. But I also started to recognize the weaknesses of trends, and there's a couple of weaknesses. Well, first of all, let me talk about the strength of a trend. The strength of a trend is
Mhm.
that it kind of makes it a bit easier for a marketer or an innovator to make changes because the trend, in effect, has kind of outlined the changes that are necessary. So if there's a trend towards low carbohydrate beer, then all of a sudden that's what the marketers will innovate to, if you like.
Mhm.
Um, so that's the advantage of trends. You do have to adapt to them because they represent a change in consumer preferences. But there were two really weaknesses of trends. One was because they were obvious, you got no competitive advantage out of a trend. Because if we were producing a low carbohydrate beer, so were all of our competitors. So there's really no advantage. And I think the other challenge or disadvantage of trends, if you like, is that they are deceptive. And they're deceptive in a way that they kind of people can fall into the trap of believing that the trend will persist into the future, and therefore they don't forewarn you of forecasts which are based on trends don't forewarn you of impending discontinuities. And so the question for me, as someone who was competitive and looking for an advantage for his company, was given the weaknesses of trends, there's no real competitive advantage, and they're not really forewarning you of impending discontinuities. How can you get ahead of trends? And I remember clearly that was December 2003, and that was a question I posed. And that's when I discovered the Australian Foresight Institute, which had only recently been set up about 2 or 3 years earlier, and that was based out of Swinburne University in Melbourne. And I enrolled in that course, and so that really set me down the foresight path, if you like. I had no idea what foresight was. I remember day one of the course, so that's about March 2004, and I remember thinking, or learning that we're not going to teach you to be able to predict the future or whatever it may be. And I remember being disappointed by that because I was that's how naive I probably was at the time. But yeah, so that's when I started Foresight. I started studying in March 2004, and then I got appointed as Foresight Manager a couple of months later. So I was clearly underprepared for that role. But I guess given the relationships I'd built up over the preceding 8 years, uh, people, the leaders at Foster's recognised that foresight was probably a necessary skill to have in the organisation, and they probably had faith that I'd be able to kind of develop those skills as I went along. But certainly, as I said, I'd only been studying about 8 or 10 weeks before I was appointed foresight manager. So I really was very green, to say the least.
Well, thank you for sharing and loved all this uh, phrase that you say that you when you are like only focused on trends, you don't have that competitive advantage and sort of happen in many organizations that I see many people from strategy or what you say the market that see people sort of anxious of trying to always be in the on the mainstream or in the we are doing some trends we are like of they kind of imagine that they are always like in the of the avant-garde of the market and as you say this is not it's not that the reality at the end you are behind that the trends and I don't know if you probably well in to give you some context sometimes in Latin America we are some cities are going more in advance but some others not at all or we have like the traditional uh, directors or headquarters or people that don't know exactly foresight but how you can start to adopt the strategic foresight? What do you tell to this organization that what is the advantage of 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 taking seriously introducing strategic foresight at their organizations?
Well, it's interesting. I think how I initially um, sell in foresight, and I had to think about this, is I wouldn't do foresight
Hmm.
the way I did it.
Yeah.
So if I can go back again, I think the mistake I made was I took on the responsibility for, or thought it was my responsibility to be the originator of insights.
Hmm.
And I think that's not the way you do organizational foresight. So you can't have a one or two or a little department that kind of operates secretly,
Hmm.
and then they emerge from their room saying, here are the answers for the future. I think, but that's almost what I tried to do. So again, I think with experience, I think the way to develop foresight and to sustainably embed foresight within an organization is not to do it as a solo individual or as an individual or as a separate department, if you like,
Hmm.
but it's to embed it through everyday operations and everyday decision making. And I think that's the approach that needs to be taken, or that I would certainly take today. And I think how you embed it is through a couple of simple processes. Is how do you get people within an organization to naturally question their assumptions about the decisions that they're making. So you make surfacing assumptions a natural part of how this organization operates. So that is, I'm aware of the assumptions that I have in terms of this decision, and I'm consciously kind of looking for, are those assumptions, do they remain valid? What other alternatives are out there? So I think that's something that you can spread throughout an organization. So that's one thing. I think the other simple thing is just getting people within organizations to think through the implications or consequences, not only the primary consequences, but
Mm.
the secondary and tertiary consequences of their decisions. So you're naturally thinking in a more foresightful manner. And really, that's the utilization of very, simple tools like a futures wheel or whatever. So
Mm.
to embed that type of behavior, questioning and or knowing, being conscious of your assumptions, questioning your assumptions, thinking through primary, secondary, tertiary implications of decisions, they're relatively simple things, but all of a sudden, if you can embed those behaviors, the organization naturally becomes more foresightful. And then the only other thing you could possibly overlay over the top of that is some type of strategic intelligence process, I think, where you are scanning the external environment in a systematic way. And again, it's not the role of an individual to do that, but how do you set up a process so that the organization's members can all contribute to that kind of scanning process? So to me, foresight can struggle within an organization, but I think the fault of that tends to be perhaps the person doing the role. And I certainly put my hand up that, as I said, back in 2004, I probably took on that responsibility myself to say, well, I've got to be the originator of kind of what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years or what have you,
Mm.
rather than looking back and say, how can I contribute to embedding a foresight culture within the organization? I think that's more a sustainable thing because that then just becomes that's the way we do things around here.
Yeah. Lovely. I really love your tips of how to make it happen inside the organization, and love also the that you think like this forward, like thinking about the implications, the second and third,
Mm,
and because we sometimes we face with many linear thinking, uh,
correct.
and sometimes we don't see, like you say, forward. It's a good exercise. Uh, and in this sense, like as you said, in 2004, probably we don't have like this data pressure that we have many data, many technology, when many we have a generative AI, and we heard a lot in the organization that many people see foresight or wish to see it as a productive thing, and they force, okay, they want sort of one like a magic trick, or
Mm,
and how can you sell foresight and say, okay, it's not the predictive thing, foresight will not, it's not like the
yeah.
magic trick, and you have the solution and you implement it. How you can break with that mindset?
Well, look, it's interesting. We live in a really interesting time in terms of there seems to be a hell of a lot of forces happening at once.
Mhm.
There's climate forces, there's technology forces, there's AI, there's geopolitics. There's a lot of really big dynamic stuff happening at the moment. And so if anybody is thinking that kind of predictive tools are going to provide answers, we've probably never been further away from that point. That would be my perspective. My experience as a consultant is that demand for foresight skills rises with uncertainty. I think when times are relatively stable, uh, leaders of organisations tend to think, well, we don't need foresight skills necessarily because we've got all the answers. We're going well, thank you. At a time like we live in at the moment, I think the overwhelming thing is organisations are really struggling, and leaders are really struggling to make sense of their environment.
Mhm.
And therefore, for the foresight community, I would say there's a lot of demand for people who can help leaders to make sense of the dynamics that are shifting
Mhm.
within their environment. Now, that's not an easy task, but I think again, you return to kind of, well, what's the core role of a futurist is really to help people to surface their assumptions. And that's fundamentally the time that we're living in at the moment is a time where assumptions about how a market works and have worked for a long time, those assumptions are being challenged. And that's really the role of a futurist is really to help people question their existing assumptions and perhaps even form new ones that are more relevant to the shifting environment that is today. So that to me, I think the time, I think prediction or the use of say predictive technology is probably folly at the best of times, but certainly at a time like where there is so much uncertainty today, I think there's never been a time more suited for foresight, the use of foresight within organizations.
Yeah, I completely agree with it. I think that this when this uncertainty is the best thing, and to use it for it. And as you said, also in your book, one thing that also always is in my mind is that uh, that framework that you use, like this uh, conscious incompetence,
Oh
unconscious
yeah,
competence, and most at the end that you put when you and you said it before in the first point that also helps you with the discontinuities. You find the discontinuities in that thing. Can you talk a little bit about that discontinuities? I think is a good place to bring it to
yep.
the conversation.
So what did you ask there? Sorry.
Oh, yeah. If you can talk about that how Foresight helps to detect that discontinuities, yeah, that you said before, no? I think it's also a good argument
Yep.
for.
And I think it's funny because I think um, particularly in Australia,
Mm,
we are conditioned to, and this really comes out of Peter Schwartz wrote about this in his great book, The Art of the Long View. He wrote that, business people have tended to be conditioned that serious information comes in the form of tables and graphs and charts and so forth. And in my studies, when you're looking for kind of discontinuities, you're looking for, well, what are the embryonic issues uh, be, that have not yet emerged? Once something has emerged, that then is becomes a trend. Now, if you're not ready for that embryonic issue when it does emerge, then you are in a lot of trouble, and that's what a discontinuity is.
mm,
So, I wrote about in the book about we need to develop methods for anticipating embryonic issues. And I think so. I spoke about the concepts like dirty secrets
mm,
or unresolved tensions, if you like. These are things that are you don't need data to recognize. You just need a simple approach. I spoke about the pendulum theory in terms of whenever we lose something, over time what we lose. Well, whenever we gain something, we also lose something. And over time, what we lose becomes scarce, it becomes increasingly valued, and then
mm,
our behavior kind of switches again. So, just by having simple theories for understanding change gives you the tools to anticipate impending discontinuities. And that was, the point I tried to make and in the book. And they were really just tools that I developed over the course of the last 20 years in just studying change and also working with organizations. But it's funny that often when I do presentations, I'll talk about, these are ways to think about the future. And not once do you mention data or anything like that, because,
mm,
yeah, if you're talking about an embryonic issue, then by its very nature, it lacks data of statistical significance because it's still embryonic. So you need different tools and different ways of looking at the change before it occurs. The data will be obvious once it becomes an emerging
mm.
trend. But as I said, if you haven't positioned yourself for that emergence or that discontinuity, that's when you find yourself in a lot of trouble. And that's what I tried to write about. I tried to give people or show them some of the tools that I use to identify those issues.
Probably, and I connect with another point that you said that when I read was mind blowing because I always say to my students, nobody teaches how to work, and very few people teach us how to do strategy.
Mm,
And you
yep,
know, many even C-level confuse the strategy with planning, and
correct.
you distinguish a lot and in very in an explicit way. And is a strategic design is about setting the organization's future direction and goals. And you say, I love this, strategy is about learning.
Yep.
And how can we change this process or telling argument with this? I really love at the level listen to it because it's so common to confuse the
Yeah.
strategy with plan.
Well, there's a bit to unpack there. First of all, the strategy is planning. Well, a real pioneer there was. Hopefully, you can see that book. I pay homage to him. You can see the amount of
Yeah,
that's Ari Hearst, The
very
Living
good.
Company. You can see all my little
Yeah.
post-it notes and so forth. Just a brilliant book as well by the late Ari Hearst. And he spoke about strategy as learning. And I remember when I first heard that quote, it just did not make sense to me because it was like, no, strategy is about doing and planning, right? But where strategy is about learning, as I learned, was it's about understanding, well, what are the drivers or the forces that have shaped the history of our industry? What are the drivers shaping today? And what are the drivers that are changing that could shape tomorrow's industry? And that's where you've got to learn, understand all of that before we worry about what are we going to do. Let's try and find out what we're actually planning for or what we're developing a strategy for. And central to my approach, and this is really the theme of the book, is that planning is a subset of strategy, but strategy is the big fella,
Yeah.
and planning is a little subset of that. And strategy is really it's about achieving your goals in a perceived future environments. That's the whole thing. And my point here in the book was that our perception of the future is the center point of strategy. Okay, we're designing what we will do and how we will do it to be successful in a future environment. But too often we pay very little regard to the future. Okay, so but it's our perception of the future, that's all we have. So the whole thing was how do we improve our perceptions of the future? And that's where scenario planning came into it. And that's where strategy as learning comes into it, because it's only by understanding, as I said, what are the factors that have shaped our industry, that are shaping our industry, and that could continue to shape our industry going forward. Until we can identify those drivers and learn about them, what is changing, what might not, what is waning in influence, what's increasing in influence. It's through that learning that we can start to form better pictures about, well, what type of industry are we actually preparing for? And so that, to me, our perceptions of different futures is the starting point for strategic design, and it's the missing element. And it's just so obvious that it is the center point, and it's so obvious that it's kind of missing. The other point I'd just say about learning is
Mhm.
that, particularly in a group dynamic, and my advice for strategy is to involve as many people as is practical. I
Mhm.
think too often strategy has been designed by a select group of people behind closed doors. So it's almost like you're in a small cubicle at the moment. It's you and me go into this cubicle. We design a little strategy. When we come out, and then we expect everybody to implement that. And the problem with strategy, of course, as you know, it's one of the big problems is lack of implementation. And lack of implementation because, well, people they have a lack of understanding about the strategy. They don't know why they're doing what they're doing, and so forth. But if you can involve as many people as practical, so implementers as well as leaders, bring them all together, share their thoughts on what the future could look like, and therefore what we could do, then all of a sudden you'll have a broad group of employees who have learned. They have an understanding of the drivers shaping the future. They have an
Mhm.
understanding of why we're doing what we're doing. they will naturally then have a passion for the strategy, and they'll have buy into the strategy, and they in effect they become advocates for implementing the strategy. And as I said, at a center, the center of that is kind of that strategy is learning, understanding the factors that could shape the future. And I think out of that understanding comes such clarity. And so for me, as I said, when I first heard the word or the phrase, planning is learning or strategy is learning, I was a bit dismissive of it. But
Mm.
that was, again, that was my naivety. And then when the breakthrough came to me, I just thought, well, that is so powerful. It's not about the doing. The doing's the very last bit of the piece of the puzzle. It's the learning that's so central to that. And I think that's where not enough time is spent on that learning phase, clearly. How do we do it? We go away for a weekend and we get the job done on some butcher's paper. And so we do it all in a couple of hours. And if we can manage to fit in a game of golf over that weekend as well, then so, yeah, even better. So
Lovely. And yeah, and I love with this, you know, invite people to the process, and yeah, they buy the future. Yeah, they uh get in the future price that can emerge. They feel actually more. Uh, they become fan even of the organization, doing that. I think that the people got more engaged by
correct.
knowing this process. And one of the things you share, and it's I love how you explain the book, the fundamentals, and then you get into the process and you do all that, well, the scanning process and everything and the
Yeah.
scenario drivers, but is a basic question that I always ask. Oh, how long does it take all this process? I don't know if in these years you have changed a little bit, or you how much it takes to do this strategic challenge, this strategic foresight process.
Yeah. Look, it's an interesting question, and I,
Mhm.
I, I don't think there's one answer to it. I think in the book, I wrote a 26-week process, which is probably ideal. But I think the answer to your question is how long is the process? The process is as long as the client can afford. And 26 weeks or 6 months, a lot of people's eyes will glaze over because I think, gee, that's a really long time. So I think for any consultant in the world of strategy or foresight, it's important to have multiple offerings,
Mhm.
which which will then depend on people's urgency, the urgency of the client, and so forth. I always think the client will always ask you to shorten the process. Okay, so they want answers tomorrow, and often
Mhm.
they've come to you because there is a sense of urgency. Okay, what they really needed you, they probably needed you 5 years ago, but they didn't use it. So now they've come to you now, and things are a bit more urgent. So you always need to be aware that will be where they're coming from. As someone whose role is to help people make sense of the future and also of the present, you really need to balance between the need for urgency. You need to balance between being an impediment on people's time
Mhm.
because every client, their employees are already busy doing other stuff. So now to throw on top of that their involvement in a scenario or foresight process, you're really just piling more work on top of people. So that's another balance. You need to balance, as I said, the urgency of the client. We want results tomorrow. You have to balance being an impediment on employees. So how much work can you take on to ease the load on them? Because you want the people to enjoy the process. And then the third balancing element is really you've got to allow yourself enough time to mull over and to consider the scenario outcomes or the scenario development and so forth. Because that's where the new insights emerge. So I think if you can balance those three factors,
Mhm.
that's the challenge. Certainly during COVID, a lot of scenario planning that I did moved online, of course.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, the 26-week process got condensed to about a 10-week process. So again, and I actually found that that worked really well. So I go back to my original answer. There's no real um, correct. There's no one answer in terms of how long a process should go for. I did outline an ideal process of 26 weeks, but ultimately it comes down to how much time can the client afford to give
Mm-hmm.
you, and therefore you need to develop a process that fits into that. I'll share one tip with your audience
Mm-hmm.
is that I typically used to do environmental scanning over about a 6 week period. I found that once we moved online during COVID, I shortened that period by getting the scenario participants to do the scanning rather than me. Okay, so rather than me finding kind of 60 or 80 points of scanning information, if
Mm-hmm.
I had 20 people doing scenarios, I'd get them to find maybe 3 points of information each. And the benefit of that approach was that because people had found this information themselves and been able to process it themselves, when it came to time to choosing scenario drivers or to developing the scenarios, I found that they were richer within their mind. So they had better stimulus because they'd kind of found it. So that's a tip for anyone out there who's thinking of undertaking a scenario process. If they're not already, to consider giving the participants ownership over the environmental scan. And as I said, I found that that kind of led to a richer scenario development by those individuals.
Lovely. Sounds, yeah. I mean, love that this, you said this tip. Thank you for sharing that, involve the participants with the scanning. And I think that they, yeah, help them to develop that mindset to be more involved in the process, to notice what's happening. And I think that adds actually more value to the organization, at least doing the
Mm,
process, and also like making like capabilities of foresight. It's like if you were training them in the process, in the practice, and that sounds good.
mm,
And another thing that when I read in your book was this concept that you say that Keith van der Heijden of the remarkable people. Because when you explain or you got the concept of for van der Heijden, I start to thinking about remarkable people that I know, and that made me happy. This they're intensely curious but thorough observers, and that understand the way the world works. And when I see now, I think that is very important also to look the future, but also to have people to know how do we get where we are now. And we always kind of miss that kind of people. I don't know if we can be like strategic foresight practitioners and at the same time be sort of remarkable people, or these people could be some people from the council for the board of the organization, some consultant. In your
mm.
experience, who is this remarkable people, or how you work with them in the process?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting phrase. So a case Vanderhyde, I think he was at Shell, and then I think the phrase of remarkable people really does go back to Pierre Vark,
Mm,
who headed up the Shell scenarios in the late 60s, early 70s. Look, a remarkable people. I think it's a funny label. Um, because it can almost bestow on someone that they're a special type of person. When really what the phrase means is someone who brings an original or
mhm.
different perspective on a particular topic. So it's about
Wow.
seeing something differently, if you like. So I think by giving the title a remarkable person, it can kind of bestow on them a special status. Really, it's all about this person has an original insight or a different insight on a particular topic. Now, those people are really important in a scenario process, and they do not have to be related to your industry at all. They just
Mm,
have to be able to think differently.
mm,
Um, and I think at the end of the day, a successful scenario process should involve a diverse group of people with diverse perspectives. Because if
Mm.
it's just five people who have the same experience as myself, they're pretty much going to be thinking the same thing, and the scenarios will tend to be bland. You want to introduce people who perceive a topic differently. So that was kind of the value of bringing in outsiders who can potentially shed new light on a particular topic. The one thing I will say though is if you, for whatever reason, you can't reach out to someone who sees differently or someone from a different industry or what have you, one way to think differently or to encourage thinking differently within a workshop is just to be at the very front, at the very start, get people to explicitly mark down what are our operating assumptions around this particular topic. So one of the projects I had at Foster's was, what could the beer market look like in 10 years' time?
Mm.
Now, what I would do today, which I didn't do then, would be to start that workshop by just listing all of our assumptions. Okay,
Mm.
because all an original, all a remarkable person or a perception pioneer, all they really are is someone who works under or can see the validity in different assumptions. Okay, so everyone's capable of thinking like that themselves. They just need a little process to do it. And I think the starting process is there to say, okay, list all your assumptions about how does our market work and how do we think it's going to work in 5 or 10 years' time. Let's
Yes.
list those. Now, let's try and understand what's changing that could impact those assumptions and that could really invalidate some of those for the future. And that's where your future scenario. So I guess the point I'm trying to make there is
Mm.
involving others who naturally kind of think differently is a great way to stimulate scenario thinking. But in the absence of that, there are processes that you can internalize that'll help you get to thinking differently on your own.
Oh, totally. Love that. The different, I sort of imagine kind of the devil advocate or something like that. Like this guy that help you turn to, yeah, you say that face your assumptions or like, okay, are you sure about it? I am in this area, and I love the diversity uh that you should bring to the process. And one of the other projects that you mentioned, the book, was your Victorian library,
Mm.
and I loved the if you can talk us about a little bit of that process. I love it because it was a public stuff, and I would love that in my city in Mexico. Basically, we use more foresight in the public sector, and well done. So, what you learn? How was that process?
Well, it was a terrific project and a real high point of my professional career, if you like. So to take the listener back, in 2012, I was offered the opportunity to do some scenarios and develop a strategic framework for the Victorian library sector. And the question that guided the process was, what could a public library look like in 2030? So it was basically a 20-year horizon. So quite daunting.
Mm.
Um, and as I said, I hadn't been, in myself, I probably hadn't been in a public library for 20 years
Mm.
at the time. And I remember as I got the project, and I'd mention the project to people, my friends, and I'd say, this is the project. What could a library look like in 20 years? And they'd say, well, that's the easiest project in the world. Libraries won't exist. And that was a reasonably common kind of thought because everything was turning digital and so forth. So why do people need books and why do people need to borrow books? So, but it was such a great process. It involved 90 participants, so a lot. And this is where my thinking came about: involve as many people as practical. Okay. I'll give you a couple of things and I'll relate this to the scenario process.
Mhm.
I did interviews. Um, I interviewed roughly. 15 or so leaders within the public library sector. And I spoke to one fellow, and he'd just come back from a study trip in Scandinavia, and he mentioned about recording studios were in public libraries. And that concept was so different for me. I thought, wow. But my instant thought was that'll never happen. But he'd planted a seed in my mind. And this is the value of doing interviews.
Mm.
You get exposed to different thinking, and you never know where the nuggets of gold are going to be. Um, we did a two workshops with 45 people in each, so really big workshops, so 90 people in total.
Oh,
And this is my point about um, just because you're a senior executive does not mean that you have a monopoly on thoughts about the future. Okay. And involve as many people as practical, because it was during these workshops where some people came up with one of the drivers that they thought was significant for the future of libraries was the growing distrust of traditional institutions.
mm.
And at the time in 2012, I was a bit dismissive of that, but they voted for that. They said this should be one of our drivers. So it goes to show you that no one knows what's necessarily going to be important. And so you want as much variety in the workshop as possible. So that
Okay.
was a second learning for me. I mean, that turned
Yeah.
out to be so foresightful, given what's happened in elections around the world ever since. And then look, and then we developed some scenarios for 2030, and we came up with kind of the creative library concept. Now, the creative library was a place where people, rather than a library being a static kind of depository for finished content, for books,
Mm.
a creative library was a place where people created content. So
Okay.
it was a place with pottery classes, with music classes, with language classes, etc. This vibrant hub in the middle of a village that's open from first thing in the morning till midnight, and so that's where the whole recording studios in libraries from that very first interview ended up playing a role in the scenario development and so forth, and it was quite transformational. The key point I'd say, one of the key turning points, and I say this all the time, is it's okay to develop scenarios, and you can develop the best scenarios,
Hmm.
but to develop strategy, the second step is then to say what is our sense of identity as an organization or as an industry. And that's where we had to revisit that as a library sector. And if you think about the purpose of public libraries going back, 150, 200 years,
Yeah.
the purpose of a public library was to provide universal access to information. Now we had to flip that because access to information in 2012 was no longer necessarily a social scarcity. And so we expanded that purpose to say, well, a library's purpose is to provide solutions to society's information needs, whatever those information needs may be. And in that creative scenario, if you like, the information need for people like you and I was help me to create. And a public library was somewhere where you could go, as I said, to learn to play guitar or to learn pottery, etc. So look, that we are now, what is it, 2025? We're 13 years down the track. And that strategic framework from 2012 is still used today to guide the strategic direction of the Victorian public library sector. So I'm very proud that the framework, which involved, as I said, 90 people from the industry, is still relevant 13 years later. So it's served its long-term purpose. So I'm very proud of that piece of work. And it was a great sector to work with, great people.
No, I really love that, and I also I library fan, sort of geek, but I also love this change that you produce or help to produce, and of also not look only for information, but create content, be there, and also I see that have many implications from the evolution of how people see the public sector and how they interact with it, and like give spaces to the citizens that now we need it a lot to to be more involved in the city. And well, finally, what happened with Foster? How do it evolve? Getting back, at the beginning, and you have your aha moment. You go to this university. You learn about foresight, how
Mm.
Foster changed during your exchange, in that sense, and
Yep.
also get into it. We can connect of what you're doing right now.
Sure.
What is
Well,
your, yeah.
yeah. Okay. Well, look, I'll touch on Foster's one more. I think, as I said, to go back to the original point, I think what I would do differently is as I said, I tried to be the originator of insights, whereas I should have focused on more cultural change and embedding foresight in everyday decision making. I've already spoken about that. The big impact, I think, from a foresight perspective, we did scenarios in 2005, looking out 10 years to 2015, and the question that guided that was, what could the beer market look like?
Mm,
And I think that's one of the things so we developed a couple of scenarios there, and the big finding out of that project was a different categories of beer were likely to emerge, being kind of lower alcohol, kind of mid-strength beers would grow because of a number of factors. And also we saw the growth of craft beer, obviously. So that whole process illuminated for me the value of planning as learning. We
mm,
arrived at those new insights because we started to explore, well, what are the drivers that are likely to shape the next 10 years, and how, what drivers are changing and so forth. And we saw an aging population. We saw uh, tax pressures on alcohol content because you get taxed. The higher the alcohol, the higher tax you get. We saw that as people evolved from materialism to more post-materialism, they would be much more exploratory in their tastes and the experiences that they were seeking. So the bland draft beer, the bland lagers, and so forth, which were dominating the Australian landscape, they would be superseded by kind of craft beers and so forth. And that's really how that whole beer market has played out, really in Australia over the past 20 years. I left Foster's in early 2007. And the reason for that is I was getting more and more requests from other companies
mm,
to help them with their scenario planning. So it occurred to me that, and look, I'd been at Foster's 12 years, and for me, I felt like a change, so I proactively
mhm,
left there, and I've been consulting uh, since 2007, which I really enjoy. I enjoy doing scenarios. Um, I enjoyed the process of writing. Um,
mhm.
so at the moment, I'm writing a second book,
Right.
um,
Congrats.
which I enjoy the process. I like it. It's almost meditative, I think, when you get into that deep state of writing. And
Yeah.
I enjoy, considering or being challenged by thoughts and then coming up with new insights. I enjoy that process. And increasingly, I've got into education. So I lecture in strategic foresight at the University of New South Wales,
Mm,
which I also enjoy. The teaching is something that I've kind of just got into over the last couple of years, but it's very similar to the coaching. It's the same
mm,
thing, and you get the same pleasure out of it because when you see people develop, you really enjoy that, and so yeah, I like that aspect of it as well. But certainly, my main goal over the next 6 months is to complete this book, my second book, which is really on scanning. So
nice.
it's a different aspect of strategic foresight. But yeah, so that's kind of what's keeping me busy at the moment.
Lovely. Can't wait to see and to read it. Yeah, yeah. It seems like, and I'm so happy that, at the end, foresight is a pretty humble uh, thing. I think it's helps people because at the end, when you contemplate the future, and always we said if there's no future, there's no hope at all.
Mm,
And you help people to see or see together and to try to find some paths at the end, and that makes people see, okay, there's no, like, as we can see now, probably we can be a little bit sad about the situation and context that we live, but there's
mm,
also uh, foresight give you a lot of tools to say, we can impede to this to happen, or there's another way that we can
mm,
explore, and that makes a lot of good in people, and it's mind blowing when you do it, or when you face it, or when you open to that, or you have your own discoveries.
mm.
And thanks for that work. We could be here talking and talking, but only to do a wrap up, we always have this checkout with the image of the future. What is your image of the future? What is your best case scenario? What in the personal and professional way?
Well, a professional look. I'd love to sit back in say 10 years time and have a selection of books that I've written. I found that, as I said to you just then, I enjoy the process of writing. I enjoy the idea of sharing what I hope are original insights with an audience, and I also enjoy contributing to the growth of the foresight community. So that's hopefully I think that's what I'd like to do. I'm in a small village, which is a great environment for writing. The area
Mm.
where I live is quite a creative area and so forth. So, from a professional perspective, I think to continue to contribute to the growth of the strategic foresight field, probably through my writing as much as anything, is something. And then from a personal perspective, well, short term, I said to you, look, it'd be great to win a grand final this year. But that's in the next 6 weeks, but it's very short term.
Yeah.
But I think just to be just be happy and healthy, and I've got a young daughter who's 13, so continue to watch her grow and to be healthy and happy as well is would be a great personal goal as well, obviously. So, but other than that, I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I've enjoyed your interest in my career and what I can share with you. So I hope you enjoyed that as well.
Thank you so much, Steve. I really enjoy. Thank you for sharing, for your generosity, and also I enjoyed so much this conversation, and look forward sometimes to meet or be in touch. Steve, thank you for all you have done.
No worries. I hope so. Cheers, Lewis. Cheers.
Cheers. So, Reventando los Podcasts es dirigido por Luis Salas y producido por Polymath, una red de consultores que co-creamos organizaciones ambidiestras. Pues ve a implementar algo, que estés muy bien. Thank you. Chao, Steve. Thank you.